Gathered here, there's been little sleep. Instead, there's been time to reflect on the impact of the princess's death.
There's just like a stillness. It's so silent and it makes you feel really strange. I've never felt like this. I never thought it would affect me in such a way.
It's really amazing how you just look around and you see people of different races and different ages, and different colours.
It's like trying to bridge this gap between everyone.
It's absolutely unbelievable what's shown by the people, and our hearts go out to the boys, and we hope someone puts their arms around them like their mum did.
On the roads leading to Westminster Abbey, people have been camping on the pavements to ensure their place along the route which the funeral procession will take. They've been warned to bring plenty of food, drink and warm clothing to see them through a long day. But most believe the discomfort is worth it.
It's very sad, very, very sad, and I'm just glad I came. I'd rather be here than anywhere else at the moment. This is the place I'd much rather be.
Others have found equally unusual places to spend the night. These people are making the most of the free accommodation offered on a train which is going nowhere. This particular train was named by Diana, Princess of Wales, in 1988. It's called the Red Cross after one of her favourite charities. And staff here at Paddington Station felt rather than it sitting empty in a depot, it should be turned into a temporary hotel. The capital's stations will be key pressure points during the day. They are already busy with people arriving for the funeral, and the police estimate up to 6 million people will flood into London. The railway companies admit the scale of the demand has taken them by surprise.
We're astonished at the numbers because we know that our special trains were completely sold out. One train that frankly didn't actually exist 48 hours ago, we just put it into the timetable, is completely sold out. We've laid on extra trains, we've rearranged our timetable so the trains get into Paddington much earlier.
At the moment, many are still making their way to London. This special train left Plymouth in the early hours, picking up passengers en route. They're people who are determined to make the journey so they can pay their respects to the People's Princess. Alison Holt, BBC News.
As people come into London this morning, the police say traffic so far has been quiet. In the last few minutes, the RAC say the roads are surprisingly clear. But the police have already closed dozens of roads around the funeral procession's route. Roads leading into Westminster and Whitehall had to be shut 3 hours earlier than expected because of the number of people camped there. Scotland Yard are now asking the public to avoid Parliament Square and Whitehall. They suggest that people go to other parts of the route. Motorways into the capital are also quiet at the moment. And for the latest on the travel situation, we go over to BBC Greater London Radio Studio at Scotland Yard. Sally Bozeman is our travel reporter. Sally, what's the position from your central vantage point?
Well, as you said, Martin, it's surprisingly clear at the moment. Most main routes coming into London are running really very well indeed. But obviously worth bearing in mind if you are planning to come in into London via car, parking restrictions are very strictly enforced today. The police will have no hesitation in towing people away very quickly. So the best advice that we can give is to say, come as near to the capital as you can to where you can park legally, and from there get public transport into the centre. Now there are about 6 underground stations around the Westminster Abbey area that are very useful. You can go to Green Park, St James Park, Victoria, the Embankment, Hyde Park Corner or Charing Cross. All of those underground stations are within walking distance of the Abbey and very, very accessible. If you are coming into town and you want to use a car park, Battersea Park have allocated 2,000 spaces there to park and then to come in by public transport. And also out at Docklands Light Railway, the Royal Victoria Dock, they've allocated 1,000 spaces there on a sort of park and ride basis, again to access London. So those are the best advice I can give you, is to park, get on public transport, and that will be by far the easiest way to access central London.
Sally, is there any sense in which the police may have overestimated the number of people who are actually heading for central London? and that in fact the crowds may not be quite as big as expected?
Well, I think they, as we all, are sort of, it's all new territory for us. No one really is sure. There have been various estimates bandied about throughout the week, but it's very unknown territory. We will watch the situation very closely. It could be that later on this morning the traffic really starts to build up. But as I say, they are urging most people to come in where possible by public transport.
Sally, thank you very much indeed. And the build-up of mourners arriving in London by car, coach and train is well underway. Our correspondent George Eakin is at King's Cross Station. George, is the pattern the same on rail as we are seeing on the roads? Are there in fact not quite as many people arriving by train as had been expected?
Well, it's difficult to tell, Martin, because the main rush of arrivals by train will come slightly later, around 7:30, between 7:30 and 9, I would say. There have been special trains arriving here during the night at King's Cross from Peterborough, Cambridge, that sort of direction, and one special train from Leeds arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning, which was jammed, according to a spokesman here. Later on, a regular service from Leeds comes in, and then slightly later, around about sort of 8:45, we start seeing special trains arriving from the likes of Edinburgh, a train there which left at 4 in the morning, said to be very full. And in the meantime, trains coming in all the time, every 10 or 15 minutes, with extra stock added, so that although there aren't many extra services, the trains themselves can carry more passengers.
George, thank you very much. And after the funeral at Westminster, Diana's coffin will be taken through North London to join the M1 at Brent Cross. Our reporter Jane Peel is there. Jane, what's the position from your vantage point?
Well, this is normally one of the busiest shopping areas in London on a Saturday, and all commercial activity will be coming to a close this morning in respect for Diana, Princess of Wales. Her coffin will come along these roads behind me, the A41, then the North Circular Road, passing out under the underpass towards junction 1 of the M1 and away, leaving London for the last time on her final journey to Althorpe. At the moment, traffic is indeed very light. The police say that it's normal for a Saturday morning. What they're concerned about really is not what's happening now, but what might happen on the M1 later on. They've got no idea how many people will turn out on the bridges or along the embankments to watch the cortege pass, or indeed what will happen to the traffic on the motorway coming southbound, and whether they'll stop against all advice. Here at Brent Cross, there are very few people around at the moment. I think what will happen is that people will gather on these bridges to watch the cortege later on, perhaps after watching the funeral service on the television. But there are many people from this area who've already been on their way to central London. I was staying at a hotel nearby, and at 5 o'clock this morning I met 2 young men from Arizona who were here for a basketball tournament this weekend, who said that they felt they just had to go into town to mark this historic and very sad event. And there are many people here who are doing that and who are planning to try to come out this way later on today to see the cortege on its final journey.
And Jane, do you think it's possible that so many people may have been put off by the reports of up to 6 million people heading for the centre of London, that some people have decided not to make the journey but stay home and watch it on television?
I think that's quite possible. We've been hearing all week that many millions of people will be coming. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner said he thought many millions would be coming. We saw the television pictures obviously last night in central London of thousands and thousands of people lining the Mall and all areas in central London. And I think many people will think, well, we're probably going to see more of it on television if we stay at home and watch the service. Obviously we won't get the atmosphere and be there to pay our respects, but I think we may see fewer people at least travelling into London from outside than perhaps had been anticipated.
Jane, thank you very much indeed. And as we heard from George, many extra rail and coach services have been laid on to bring people from around the country to London for the funeral. Many of them have still to arrive. Liz McKean joined mourners on the train from Glasgow, which has arrived. It arrived during the night.
21:38 Great North Eastern Railway service to London King's Cross.
Waiting for one of the final trains into London, a last chance for people from the furthest reaches of Britain to journey to the capital. Many have no idea where they'll go when they arrive. They simply want to be there. The O'Neill family joined the train at Glasgow. This will be their first ever trip to London, and they have very personal reasons for coming.
I actually met her twice before. I met her in Childline, and we met her when she visited Easter House in the 80s. My husband actually met her then, and my daughter presented her a bouquet of flowers.
She's coming from Kensington Palace now, tonight. Yeah. So she comes along there, and then where?
This group is coming from Newcastle. They met up on the train and have decided to stick together for their time in London. They said they couldn't bear to watch the TV at home. They wanted to be part of a crowd, to share a moment they'll never forget.
She was somebody I'd always admired and respected. And after seeing all the coverage and everything, I just decided 2 hours ago to ring up and see if we could catch a train and just come to London and pay it in person. The people with AIDS, I think, really brought it home to myself. And I think the landmines, more recently, has brought it home to a lot of people. She's just done so much for others.
A few moments of snatched sleep. The rest of the night will be spent on the streets. Given the week-long mood of mourning, it's perhaps surprising how many people decided to make this journey right at the last moment. Many of them dropped everything to come. Dirty dishes left in the sink, arrangements hastily cancelled, phone calls not returned.
It's Buckingham Palace. That's where the Queen stays.
Down Parliament Street.
They may not have invitations, but everyone feels included. Also on the train, Diana's one-time dancing partner and friend, who'll be present at her funeral.
It'll be pretty bad, especially when they start playing that music. I shall just probably fall apart, because I know there's some bits of music that she loved as well, and that'll just do me in, basically.
Which particular bits?
Well, the Verdi Requiem Mass. I mean, it's so sad.
Those that didn't know Diana feel her loss too. They've been surprised by their own reactions. To square up to the emptiness she's left behind.
I sort of don't realise what somebody's like until they've gone, and I just wanted to sort of make my mark, as it were, and just be there, you know, make the effort.
Journey's end, they arrive and head off to find their place in the crowd. Another day, one that will surely be the saddest and most extraordinary of all. Liz McKean, BBC News, King's Cross Station.
Well, police advised earlier that one of the best vantage points to view the funeral procession was Hyde Park, and our reporter Fiona Bruce is there. Fiona, what's the scene at Hyde Park now?
Well, there's probably about 300 or 400 people here. You can't see all of them behind me because people are camped out here because there's one stage on this side, and then people are actually camped out over there as well. It's difficult to say how many people are going to turn up here. So, and most of these people were camped out all night because they're so anxious to get their pitch to make sure they could see the screens. I suspect more people, a lot more people are going to turn up later on, nearer 8:30. But I suppose if people are wondering whether or not there's going to be room to come, there may still be. I was talking to people behind me about just to find out where they'd come from. Some people have come as far as Durham. I was talking to a mother who'd come with two very young daughters, and they're pretty cold and pretty damp, as everyone is here. But the feeling here seems to be everyone is determined to be part of a moment in history, really. They decided to come here rather than go along the funeral route because they were worried about the crush. There's quite a few young children here, and they were worried it would be dangerous for the children. Everyone's determined to be, as I say, part of a moment in history, and also to try and share some of the feeling of the day with other people rather than just stay at home and watch it on the television.
And of course, from Hyde Park, you do have the opportunity to view the funeral cortege twice.
Well, that's right, because it's going to go along the side of the park here. I mean, there's a concern from the police here that people are going to rush over to try and see the cortege. I think people are probably going to be fairly sensible, actually. I mean, most people have got their pitch, and I think they're pretty determined to stay where they are to make sure that they're actually going to see it on the screen. I think people are worried that if they rush over to see the cortege, they might then get there and not be able to get back, and they in fact won't see very much at all. So I suspect there won't be that much movement here, and people are going to stay put so they get the best view possible.
Fiona, thank you very much indeed. And Kate Adie is at Buckingham Palace now. Kate, the scene there.
It's quite a busy scene this morning. About half an hour ago, really, when we got the first light, there were still lots of people curled up in their sleeping bags and just getting up. But now, pretty well everybody is claiming their place. And along the actual line, the side of the route, there's a hefty crowd. And lots of people walking in, a lot of people from the police. There are St John ambulances. People and a lot of people just walking in very purposefully to come to what it will be, I think, one of the most heavily crowded places. And what they're doing now that there's enough light is to go around and see if they can just leave their place. Some of the messages and some of the flowers. Flowers are still coming in. It's quite extraordinary. An enormous number of people with bunches of flowers in their hands this morning.
So, Kate, briefly, there are still last-minute opportunities for people who want to come in and play their part in viewing the procession.
There are, and I think what we are safe to say, that one must never predict, that this is a very polite, orderly, well-behaved crowd of people
Kate,
here very seriously.
Thank you very much indeed for the moment. We'll be back in 10 minutes, but first, news of how the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, is being observed where you live.
Good morning from this special edition of Look North. The exodus has begun with thousands of people on their way to the capital to pay their final respects to Diana, Princess of Wales. Here, hundreds of thousands more will be paying tribute in their own way, attending special services across the region or spending time in moments of private reflection. Peter Lugg's been gauging the mood.
Amanda Shan from Leeds, one mourner in many thousands drawn to London on the tide of emotion stirred by today's events.
I can't give a reason why really we're going. We just had a tragic death in our family by the road, and we feel as though when we heard the news it just all came flooding back to us. We just feel that we have to be there to see her. Everyone's so sad. She was absolutely a wonderful person.
Like Amanda, so many others from this region feel a compelling need, a need simply to be there for Diana, however difficult the emotion of the day.
I think it'd be a very tiring day, and lots of tears, lots of sadness. I think I'm quite prepared for that.
Coach and rail services are full. The motorways are already busy. And for those left at home, the chance to share the funeral service in full via a gigantic TV screen to be set up later this morning at the cathedral in Sheffield. A congregation is expected this morning, at least equal to that which last night filled Lincoln Cathedral. Books of condolence have now been signed by thousands at public buildings around the region.
Everybody expected her to be so loving all around the world, and she's loving to everybody. And you're just gutted. I can't understand, why the Lord has to take her.
No other Saturday has been or is likely to be like this one. No sport, no shopping, only a few will be working. But West Yorkshire police officers will be on special duty. They've been drafted into London, helping the Metropolitan Force to assist the millions showing their respects.
Well, our reporter Tanya Arnold is at York Station, where special trains are this morning leaving for the capital. Tanya, what's the mood among passengers this morning?
They've been very reflective, very peaceful. People who've obviously never met each other talking quietly about what they're going to go through today as they make the long journey down to London. People are obviously dressed in dark colours, many in black, some carrying beautiful, beautiful bouquets of flowers that they've obviously thought long and hard about, with messages about what Princess Diana meant to them and meant to their friends and their family. I've been talking to a few of them, and this is what they've been saying.
She meant an awful lot, and she showed an awful lot of love, and I think that's being repaid in some way by people going, and it's just amazing to see how many people are there. Can't really quite imagine what it will be like for so many people, when we get down there.
I think the royal family itself have underestimated her popularity, and so has everybody else. Make no mistake about it, everybody knows just what they feel about Diana.
I haven't got any words to say. I just loved her that much.
Tanya, can you give us any idea of the number of people heading to the funeral in London?
There really have been many thousands leaving the region. They're talking about the biggest exodus ever from our region. Great North Eastern Railway say they've had 3,000 bookings for this morning alone. That's double the normal weekend rate. And National Express coaches say all their services have been booked up since Monday. There really are thousands of people who feel they need to go to London to personally pay their respects and show that they too cared.
Tanya in York, thank you for joining us. On the roads, the early indications are that routes are fairly clear on the way to London, but are expected to get busier later in the morning. The capital itself is expected to be severely congested, and the advice is to park outside and to catch public transport in. Religious leaders say it's important that people celebrate Diana's life today as well as mourning her death. They're urging people to go to services in their own area or to watch the funeral on television. The Roman Catholic Bishop of Leeds, David Constant, said people should grieve for Diana, but should also take a message of hope away from the day's events.
The tremendous gesture that she made by shaking the hands of someone with AIDS was itself a very dramatic thing and terribly deep. It changed people's attitudes to this awful illness just in a simple gesture. And it was that kind of empathy that she had that I think is the source of great hope for people in the future, to realise that however bad their particular situation is, there are always people like Princess Diana who care.
Well, for those who aren't travelling down to London for the funeral, there are many services of thanksgiving and remembrance in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. They'll take place across the weekend. Here's a summary. Well, in just a few hours, the Thanksgiving service will begin in Westminster Abbey, bringing to a close the final chapters in the life of Diana, Princess of Wales. We'll bring you reflections from the day in a special programme at 6:30 this evening. For now, we leave you with a look back at the way the region mourned Diana's death during a momentous week.
It's been a grey Sunday like no other. As the region's towns and cities woke to this morning's terrible news, some found comfort attending services from village churches to cathedrals.
There are 6,000 million people in this world. Most of them had seen her one way or another, and all of them will be very upset that she's not here anymore. Heaven is a lucky place today.
Princess Diana, she wasn't the princess for the white communities. She was for the whole world. You know, she was exceptional. You know, she was a darling for the whole world.
I was choked up, really choked up. If anybody is ever close to heaven, she will.
The burgeoning queue at Holy Trinity Church in Hull, a measure perhaps of the depth of public grief still to be expressed.
She did so much for people, and she really made us feel that we're all somebody.
South Yorkshire had come to mourn, reflect and pay tribute.
She was really the princess of the nation. Don't mention it.
She was just a good lady inside and out. She was treated wrong, but it made no difference.
Five days on and still people are struggling to contain their grief following Princess Diana's tragic death. At York Minster, the carpet of flowers continues to spread.
I've just been to the Minster, most moving experience. I'm going down to London for the funeral. Hope to get a good position on Friday night.
Find out what weather we can expect during the funeral day, across to Helen Young in our weather studio.
Good morning. Well, we have got a weather front in the far northwest this morning. That's going to gradually push rain southeastwards, although as you can see it doesn't reach the southeast of England until this evening, so it will be a dry day down in southeast England. At the moment, that wet weather pushing its way across Scotland then, some strong winds accompanying that as well from the west, and those winds will stay quite strong in the northwest throughout the whole day and through this evening as well. That rain then, quite heavy at the moment in some parts of western Scotland, gradually working its way eastwards then, but for the south, starting off very sunny indeed, although the cloud will develop there as we go through the morning. By midday, the first signs of the rain getting into the northwest of England then, fairly light and patchy, but still some heavy bursts as well, particularly over the higher ground. By this afternoon, the cloud will be increasing in the southeast, but still generally dry and bright in southernmost counties. Temperatures this afternoon up to around 20 to 21 degrees, further northwest around 16 to 17. So let's look at the details now then for the whole of southeast England. Starting off very sunny this morning. It has been a fairly chilly night though. Temperatures at the moment are around 12 degrees. As we go through to midday, the cloud will be developing a little bit. Temperatures getting up to 19, and then the cloud increasing from the northwest as we go through to this afternoon. The first signs of some spots of rain perhaps through Oxfordshire, but further south of that it will stay dry. Well, for tonight, that cloud and patchy rain continuing to sink its way southeastwards. Still some rain as well coming into the far northwest. Elsewhere, a cloudy night, fairly misty night, particularly in western areas around the coast and over the hills, with temperatures ending up around 11 to 14, so quite a mild night. As we go through Saturday then, that weather system pushes away down into the southeast. By Sunday you can see we've got that weather front in the far northwest. Also some very strong winds accompanying that. So on Sunday morning, windy and wet in the northwest of Scotland. Also fairly cloudy, but some brightness coming through as well. Temperatures ending up by the end of the day around 21 degrees. That's it from me. A very peaceful day to you.
Good morning to those of you just joining us. Tens of thousands of people have spent the night camped out in London waiting for the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales. Mourners have been arriving in the capital on special buses and trains. The Metropolitan Police are expecting that more than 1 million people will turn up to watch the procession. However, on the roads into London, traffic so far has been quieter than expected. Mourners have camped out overnight along the whole of the route to secure the best vantage point to view the funeral procession. Many have kept up a candlelit vigil throughout the night, and police have urged the public to avoid the areas around Westminster Abbey and Parliament Square, which are already full. But despite the crowds, police say there has been no trouble, and the mourners were notable for their respectful calm.
Burning through the cold darkness, hundreds of candles provide the focus for mourners outside Kensington Palace, waiting for the hour when the funeral procession leaves the princess's home. 2 priests have watched over her coffin throughout the night. There's been little sleep for the people gathered here, just time to reflect on the impact of Princess Diana's death.
There's just like a stillness, it's so silent and it makes you feel really strange. I've never felt like this, I never thought it would affect me in such a way.
It's really amazing how you just look around and you see people of different races and different ages, and different colours.
It's like Diana bridged this gap between everyone.
On the roads leading to Westminster Abbey, people have been camping out to ensure their place along the route which the funeral procession will take. It will be a long, uncomfortable day, but all believe it's worth it.
It's very sad, very, very sad, and I'm just glad I came. I'd rather be here than anywhere else at the moment. This is the place I'd much rather be.
Many people are still on their way to the capital. This train left Plymouth in the early hours of the morning, picking up people en route. And at the moment, the roads are still quiet. But with the police estimating up to 6 million people will flood into London to pay their respects, that won't last for long. Alison Holt, BBC News.
As we were saying earlier, the area around Westminster Abbey is already packed, and Diana Medill is there. Diana, quite a crowd.
Good morning, Martin. Indeed, the skies have now brightened over Westminster. A lot of people around here were here overnight, many of them spending the night out in sleeping bags and wrapped up in rugs. There isn't much space amongst the crowds. The crowds are already about 20 to 30 deep around me here, all on one side.
Minutes from Leeds, Edinburgh and Newcastle. With me are Jeff and Werner Atkinson, who travelled from Newcastle on one of the special trains overnight. You've been travelling most of the night. Werner, what was the atmosphere like on the train?
It was a little too buoyant for me. I would have liked it to have been a little bit quieter. Even in the first class, it was too noisy, a little bit too noisy.
It is difficult, isn't it, to get the mood absolutely right, because people also want to celebrate the life of the princess.
Yes. That's perfectly right, yes. I go the other way. I like to just have a quiet reflection. A lot of people were reading papers and magazines and commemorative things of Diana. And
Jeff, very quickly, where will you be going to watch the procession?
We're going to try and get somewhere near Hyde Park. It really depends on the crowds, but it's time to get on. I think we better make a move now.
We'll let you go. Jeff and Werner Atkinson, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
And that's the end of this special programme in which Jill Dando and myself and our reporters across London and beyond have been bringing you up to date on the gathering together of people for the funeral of the Princess of Wales. That commentary, of course, on the funeral itself continues here on BBC1 right through the day, and David Dimbleby is there.
Throughout London, all flags except this royal standard at Buckingham Palace are at half-mast. The royal standard, showing where the Queen is in residence, remains at the top of the mast. But at the Palace of Westminster here, in the morning sunshine, and at Westminster Abbey, the west door, where in 2 hours' time, the small cortege that will carry the body of the princess for the funeral service will arrive. The entrance to the door surrounded by flowers. The whole of London has spent the night in a vigil, people 10 deep now on the streets, people with candles, people with cards, people with flowers, waiting for this moment, and the mood in London seems to now be becoming more sober, more somber. A night, after all, of, in some senses, a kind of camaraderie of people who felt that they should come here to mourn the princess. But now, as the moment when the funeral procession begins, approaches, people are calming down, moving to the positions from which they hope to be able to see the events. All over London, people have been pouring in to the vantage points right the way along the route that had to be specially extended. All of them come to celebrate the moment when the body of a 36-year-old princess who struck a deep chord in the public heart passes them with its bearer party, the coffin, and their thoughts perhaps turn away from their own feelings of grief to the fact that this was, and it should not be forgotten today, the mother of 2 young children, one of whom will be king. All week London has seen this grief expressed with flowers and with messages. It began early on at the palaces, at Buckingham Palace and at the Princess's London home in Kensington Palace. Late summer here in London, looking down the ceremonial route of the Mall from Horse Guards, and this is where the great parades on the Queen's birthday take place. The Guards Memorial on the left, and crowds waiting there because that's the route that the gun carriage will take. London, full of people. We don't know how many have come, but the trains have been rattling in all morning, and many people stayed here overnight. And as we know, in the middle of the week, the decision was taken to extend the route so that more people could see, and also to narrow the route in places so that the crowds could be 10, 15 deep and still have a chance of seeing the Princess's cortege as it went past. Let's just have a look now at the key places in the route that we'll be seeing during this nearly 2-hour journey this morning. It starts at Kensington Palace, comes down and out into the South Carriage Way along Hyde Park to Hyde Park Corner, then down Constitution Hill to Buckingham Palace, and then across to Westminster Abbey. That's the simple journey on the map. This is Kensington Palace itself, where the princess had 3 apartments and where her body, with 2 priests holding vigil and candles from the 17th century brought specially from the Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace. Her body lay there last night. It's the place that was her family home in London. And that's been the focal point of attention for thousands of people, bringing these huge cascade of flowers. The small private road that leads down from Kensington Palace into the last part of Kensington High Street and then along Kensington Gore. There are no soldiers along the route as there would have been if this was a state funeral, or the kind of funeral that Winston Churchill had, the last funeral on this scale in London. The decision's been made to keep this as informal as possible, and so the police simply are holding the barriers. There will be no bands, there will be no muffled drums, there will be no soldiers marching at a slow pace, no funeral music. What the crowds gathered here will see is a very simple, sad sight of a single coffin covered with a royal standard being carried on a gun carriage. The cortege will go past some of the most familiar landmarks in this part of central London, the Royal Albert Hall. It'll come down the side of Hyde Park and reach Hyde Park Corner. Normally one of the most congested parts of the city. Today the road's cleared for the many thousands of people who've come to watch and to pay their respects. The archway at Apsley House, huge television screens that have been put up in the park so that people can watch the service. And there are several screens like that, 2 in Hyde Park, 1 in Regent's Park, for people who want to watch. That's Decimus Burton's gateway that leads from Hyde Park. We're at the Hyde Park side. Apsley House on the left, where the Duke of Wellington's used to live and where the Wellington Museum now is. And through that archway, the cortege will go out into Hyde Park Corner itself. The Wellington Arch with the Winged Victory on the top, quadriga. Through that archway, which has been specially open today. It has a police station. It's not normally open to traffic. And down Constitution Hill to Buckingham Palace. These crowds have been in an interesting mood. Walking here this morning, the atmosphere was not gloomy. It was one of a kind of camaraderie, a certain cheerfulness about the fact that people had come. It seemed all the time this week it was important to people simply to make their presence felt. We've heard it over and over again. I just wanted to be counted. I want to be there. I don't just want to watch this, I want to be there and show something by my presence. And so there has been a sort of spirit of camaraderie on the streets as people have camped out on quite a cold night with their thermos flasks and their sleeping bags, and now warming in the morning sunshine, turning from a crowd united by a kind of common spirit of purpose to people who are gradually starting to turn their thoughts towards the events of the morning and the funeral cortege and the person that they've come to mourn. There can never have been in the history of this city, perhaps in the history of any city, such a memorial of flowers as we've seen this week, in the shape of a dove outside Buckingham Palace there, piled high and with a heavy scent of lilies for morning pervading the area all around, many of them with touching messages, many of them written by children, many of them mentioning Dodi Fayed, who was travelling with the princess in the car when she was killed, as well as her. And it does seem that it's a younger generation, particularly, that mourns this princess, as though in some way she touched their hearts in a way that the older generation have not been able to do. In all the tribulation and trouble of her life, in all the difficulties she faced, she was facing the kind of problems that everybody else feels they face. And instead of covering them up, she was sharing them. She was showing how she felt. She wasn't ashamed of the problems she had. She was happy to explain them. And it seemed to have created a kind of empathy with people. We've heard it constantly from people talking about the way she spoke to the sick and the children. And that work with charity will be specially mentioned today when 500 charity workers at this point on the Mall, where Marlborough Street comes down to join the Mall, will follow the coffin all the way to Westminster Abbey. They've been selected from 110 different charities that the Princess supported, many of them children's charities, charities, of course, that were particularly dear to her, the landmine charities, the Red Cross, AIDS, the ballet. She never lost her connection with the arts. And they'll walk all the way to the Abbey and then go into St Margaret's Church just beside the Abbey to watch the service. The Abbey, of course, will by then already be full. This is the corner where the procession that goes to Trooping the Colour turns onto Horse Guards Parade. A famous spot for people who want to see the great royal processions and who today have come just to see this very simple funeral cortege go past. Union Jack there. There have been a number of banners along the route. Die, we love you, that kind of thing written on them. And the emptiness of Horse Guards Parade, because where the stands go up for Trooping the Colour, today there's just the empty space and people lining the route. The Guards Memorial to those killed in the First World War. And St James's Park beyond. The last part of the old Palace of Whitehall, Horse Guards Arch. Beautiful Portland stone building and this narrow archway that goes through it. And this is where the funeral procession will come. It is strange that this simple funeral procession will come through some of the grandest parts of this city. Places which are used to pomp and pageantry, places which have seen the great state funerals accorded to, in recent years, George VI, Winston Churchill, Earl Mountbatten. But there can never have been a funeral where the people have, in effect, taken over. It was the demands of the people to see, to take part, to mourn, that led to this long procession. It was going to be quite a short journey that the body went from St James's Palace, just near here, down Whitehall to Westminster. And instead, it had to be changed halfway through the week because the people wanted to be here. So it's exactly the opposite, almost the mirror image of the usual ceremonial, where the ceremony is devised to attract people. Here, there is very little ceremony. From there, we're looking into Downing Street, the dark grey house on the right, number 10, number 11 Downing Street, the home of Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, who himself seemed to play a critical role at one or two points in the week in pointing the way to the kind of event, the kind of memory and the kind of memorial that the princess should have. He will be in the Abbey today. But there aren't going to be many politicians, there aren't going to be heads of state. They've made it clear that this isn't that kind of a funeral. This is a funeral for, first of all, the family and the children, the families on both sides. And then perhaps for Diana's friends and for the people she worked with, and then for the British public, the people who've been mourning her. And not an event for great pomp and ceremony. The service that's been designed isn't like that. Winston Spencer Churchill, the wartime leader, related to Diana Spencer, and thus bearing the name. The Marlborough family and the Spencer family. The Spencers, contrary to what many people think, particularly outside this country, the Princess of Wales wasn't just a nursery teacher who happened to fall in love with a prince and in a fairy tale became his husband. For generations her family have been courtiers. Both her grandmothers worked for the Queen Mother, and her predecessors served successive kings and queens of Britain from the early 16th century onwards. They have this huge country house in Nottinghamshire, where she'll be buried later on today. So she was really part of this establishment, but then somehow during her lifetime, and particularly towards the end of it, she appeared to people to break away from it, to break away from the pomp and the protocol and the ceremonial and all the things we're seeing here, St. Margaret's Church and Westminster Abbey beyond, and to reach out beyond it and beyond all the restraints of the established order, to try and touch people who weren't touched by that, to reach out to the sick and the dying and the poor and the homeless, and particularly the children. And I think that's why there is this moving turnout of people today here in London and right throughout Great Britain, of people either watching this event or taking part in public demonstrations of mourning. Because somehow, though a princess, she seemed to cut across all that and reach people who perhaps never thought that those kind of people would ever touch them in quite the way that she did. It's now just after 10 to 9, and in about 20 minutes' time, the princess's funeral cortege will start on its journey from Kensington Palace. The crowds, still now most people have taken up their places. Just a thin line of police and police barricades between them and the route. Flowers too all round the west door of Westminster Abbey. And some of the flowers here have been put specially behind the barricades, the ones from members of foreign royal families and other famous people, in the garden of remembrance on the north side of the Abbey, where in November the poppies lie. These flowers have been put. There are the big garlands behind the gates there, from the crowned heads of Europe and around the world. Well, there is the scene here at Westminster Abbey as we wait for the start of the funeral procession, which which will take 1 3/4 hours nearly to arrive outside the west door at 11 o'clock. The service itself takes about 3/4 of an hour. There'll be 1 minute silence after it, and then the 77-mile drive up to Northamptonshire for her final burial at Althorpe House late this afternoon. Let's go up there now and join Brian Hanrahan.
David, it's still very quiet here. Most people haven't come out on the streets. There are a few people scattered about, but this is where the funeral cortege will leave the motorways, the arterial roads, the built-up areas, the suburbs which it's been passing through, and come out into the country, into the lanes of rural Northamptonshire where she was brought up. Harleston is the last village before Althorpe Park, very much part of the Spencer estate. They own and built most of the houses here in the village, and the cortege will come down, winding its way through the village. The traffic is still coming through this morning, and then out, up, over the hill, onto the estate itself. The last few miles, people may come and travel along them if they wish, but the police are saying that they will stop traffic and people will have to walk as they go up this last 2 miles onto the Althorpe estate and over the hill and down the other side. People have been waiting overnight. They were camped out this morning as they tried to secure a place close to the gates. Several of them I spoke to said they'd come from different parts of the country. They'd been put off going to London because of the crowds and the warnings about just how busy it was there. So they've been sleeping here in order to give themselves a chance to see the cortege.
It's an opportunity to pay your respects to Diana. I guess it's probably the closest you're going to get to her. I've never met her, so this is probably the closest I'll get.
Well, this is where she's come from, this is where she's coming back to. They say going back to your roots.
And the flowers down at the gates of Althorpe Park. The police are starting to clear them away now to give a chance for the procession to come down. And the last we'll see of it will be as the cortege comes down this hill, past the people who'll be waiting here, and then turns in through the gates of Althorpe Park into the Spencer estate, through those great wrought iron gates, part very much of this county's history. And the flowers have been left here, or not just the formal flowers, but little tributes from ordinary people. They haven't come with wrapped up bunches. They've brought their flowers and put them here. Some have been coming in during the night and laying a few more. And people are still arriving this morning to pay their own tributes. I think we can just make out what that one says. Your sun will never set from Jem. Well, we're not to know who Jem is, but Jem, like everybody else, her tribute is magnified 1,000-fold here, the sea of flowers there, and 1,000,000-fold across the country as everybody pays their own individual tribute, even though the nation is joining together for the funeral today. The burial inside the grounds will be private. We have had a glimpse of what it's like in there. It's going to be on this island in the middle of an ornamental lake, chosen because we understand it has some childhood recollections, but it's a private matter, and we're not going to take too much notice about it. It's a very restful place, and it will be away from the crowd so that her children, her 2 sons, can come here and visit the grave privately. It's a break with tradition. Normally the Spencers are buried in the local church, but on this occasion they're going to bury it inside here. The vicar of the local church in Great Brington, David McPherson, he did say a prayer this morning for the princess.
Prayer that we're on live. I read this morning for my normal morning prayer, and I thought it was apposite for today. Blessed are you, sovereign God, judge and ruler of all. To you be praise and glory forever. In the darkness of this age that is passing away, may the glory of your kingdom, which the saints enjoy, surround our steps as we journey on. May we reflect the light of your glory this day, and so be made ready to come in